funny that Karl mentioned Ellen DeGeneres, because as I was thinking about how far we've come, I thought of a personal reflection, because when Ellen came out, I was living in Dallas, a newly out gay man, and at the time, the LGBTQ community was practically invisible in the mainstream. There was no Will and Grace, there was no Willow on Buffy, and there certainly was no RuPaul's Drag Race. But I remember the sense of palpable excitement at the idea that Ellen was going to come out. I went to Sue Ellen's bar in Dallas, where I was living, amazing lesbian bar with all of my friends and my boyfriend, my very first boyfriend, and we watched in silence as that episode unfolded, and when she actually said the words and came out, there was a cheer, like the Super Bowl or something, just to be visible and be seen by the United States on mainstream television was an incredible, incredible thing. It was, I looked it up, it was April 30th, 1997. So amazing to think back on how far we have come since then. But as Karl said, the work is not done, and as much momentum as we have with marriage equality is not the only issue we're facing. So I'm excited to hear what our esteemed panel has to say about the issues that are coming up after marriage equality. So, Stan, you're sitting closest to me, so you're going to get this first. What issue is the one that you feel is most pressing, or going to be one of the most pressing in terms of the next 5-10 years for our community?
So, what is the most pressing, or what should be the most pressing, are probably two different things. So my big push, so Chicago House was founded as three things from the start. We were LGBTQ, we were HIV and AIDS, but we were also poverty, and we are still poverty. Specializing in HIV and AIDS and LGBTQ. And I guess from my perspective, marriage equality is not civil equality, and civil equality is not lived equality. And the most pressing issue that I can think of is how many of us, if you're LGBTQ in America, you're almost twice as likely to live in poverty as if you're mainstream America. And up to 30% of us need food assistance on a monthly basis. And we got where we got by telling America and Congress and corporate America that we're wealthy and have disposable incomes, and somewhere along the line we started believing that, and it's just not true. So I think poverty, that's a long answer to poverty. How's that?
Bernard.
So it's worth pausing to recognize, can you hear me? Because I hear feedback. It's worth pausing to recognize just how much we've achieved as a society over these 20 or so years even, right, since Alden was talking about, since 1996. And all those successes are worth celebrating. But it's important to also recognize that legislative change is just building the foundation, changing the laws as the requirement so we can continue to make additional progress. But full equal treatment is what we seek, right? If we learn anything from our national history, giving women and African Americans the right to vote was generations ago. But still, if we look at racism and sexism, it persists in our society, and we have to continue fighting that every single day. If we look at laws that were passed to eradicate anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, those were also generations ago. We're still fighting to make sure that our society is rid of those evils. And the same thing with the laws that were passed to provide equal treatment for LGBT community. Marriage equality was a very high-profile, very expensive battle, but in some ways, it was just building the foundation for all the work that still remains for us to do. We have to make sure that LGBT children are when they go to school to study, not to get bullied, and they're protected when they do report bullying. We have to make sure that when they go to work and they report that they are now married and have a spouse of the same sex, the employer then doesn't explicitly they can't discriminate in Illinois, but that doesn't, they don't create glass ceilings, and we affirmatively fight against that. There's still so much work to do to make sure that at every level of our society, in every socioeconomic stratum in our society, every person is protected and has equal treatment.
Tracy.
You know what? Since I publish an LGBT newspaper, I could probably name 20 next steps, but I'll try to keep it limited. Today we celebrate that Tim Cook came out, but how many people know that yet another transgender woman of color was killed, this time in Indianapolis? So our priorities and our focus of our community, I think we need to realize that our most vulnerable are still vulnerable. The hate crimes and other things that happen within the community are still there. I would say, and I have a handout, and there's some more up here for the issue that I'm mainly going to focus on tonight. So there's extra ones up here, and I'm happy to send them to folks too. It's basically on the issue of youth homelessness. It could apply to our seniors. It could apply specifically to the transgender community that Stan focuses on. But it's action steps about the issue of homeless youth. So that, to me, right now, as a community, we can make a difference. Working on this issue just in 6 months, we've already moved the needle in a lot of places on this issue, and there's many more very quick next steps we can take to help the next generation. So I'll focus tonight on that, but there are so many other issues we can talk about as well.
Lambda's in the courts, and so we're in the process of sort of negotiating the surrenders of the final 18 states on marriage. So we haven't quite moved away from marriage yet. So with marriage, one of the issues is really implementation, and with all of these laws, and the laws Bernard talked about as well, that we can have, even in Illinois, for example, we passed marriage and it was supported by all of our elected officials, and we're still even struggling to have it correctly implemented here in Cook County. So one of the provisions in our bill was that you could backdate a civil union. So if you had a civil union, you could go in and just have it sort of upgraded to a marriage, but it would go back to that date. And it was interesting because Illinois is the only state that has that, and it could have a huge impact because if you had a pension that you could have qualified for years earlier, but we haven't even, in Cook County right now, their policy has been not to honor out-of-state civil unions. And so we have someone from Vermont that is trying to get, they had it a long time ago, and they're saying, well, we didn't have it in Illinois. Well, the reality is, if we're married in Massachusetts 10 years ago, you've been married for 10 years now in Illinois. And so that's Illinois, where we have good support. How the South is going to implement marriage, how some of the backlash we're beginning to see in states around people using the argument of religious freedom, where your deeply held religious beliefs give you a right, which we obviously don't believe it gives you a right to discriminate against other people, not have them in a hospital, not rent a house or an apartment, not give them a job. These are laws that we're already watching come up, and it's a huge focus of our work. But certainly the wind is at our back, and the places, I agree with Tracy in many ways. I think the trans issues feel like the ones that are coming to the forefront the most. I think anything related to when it's gender fluid or gender queer, or it's non-conforming, and how you look, that applies to the effeminate guy as well, in employment discrimination, and for the having the right bathroom and the correct bathroom to be able to change your name to what reflects how you identify. I think those are going to be really big issues. And the income disparity, there's so many sort of layers when you look at poverty and those issues, but when you really look at the income disparity, I think for Lambda Legal, one of our biggest concerns is how that impacts elections and how it impacts the courts. Because the billionaires now that can buy races or set agendas, and it can be both good and bad. Like if you look at the environmental movement, there's a lot of push by lefties. I assume we're all on the far left, but where politicians are really pushing now more of the climate change issues. But again, if the Voting Rights Act decimated, with the inability for our political system to really be truly representative, and for a few people to sort of buy what the future agenda items are going to hold, that's going to have a gigantic impact on the courts, and ultimately that's where we go to win.
Now, Jim, you talked about some of the work that you're doing to kind of swing these other states. The rest of you up here, could you talk about the work that your organizations are doing, or that the work that you're focused on to make change in these next few years? What are you focused on these days?
So I'll probably talk about poverty. So with HIV, we built a whole system because people were dying. And we built a whole system whose teleological end was to get them into services. And then all of a sudden people were living and not dying of AIDS, and thank God. And the goal was still just to get them on benefits until they died. And we had no flow to the system, and so our end was off. I would say, and I'm not an expert in this, but I would say that our goal with marriage equality has been to assimilate and to be just like everybody else. And now then that we're at that cusp, the question is just because we can, should we? Or should we instead stay together as a community and stay proud, and instead start doing a better job of taking care of one another? Which of course brings us back to poverty. So that's really our focus, is trying to keep us united, rather than if you're white and you're privileged, you can move to Naperville and just have kids like everybody else now. But can't, just because you can, should you? Or should you instead look inward and take our Jewish brothers and sisters as a model, where if you're rich and you're Jewish, you feel a moral imperative to take care of people who are poor and who are Jewish. So
We do not advocate anyone moving to Naperville.
Actually, Naperville needs you. We were doing we participated in a high school debate on LGBT rights there, and I can tell you they need you. So if you have any family in Naperville, you support them. So we segment our work, or we think of our work in terms of our audiences, and we have distinct audiences that that we're particularly focused on. One, of course, is lawmakers. We're not giving up on the idea that lawmakers can serve to fix our society and to provide remedies to what is still wrong. And there is still a number of legislative agenda items that we need to go back to lawmakers with. Of course, the first and foremost is defending what we already have. Just since marriage equality passed in Illinois, there have been 4 attempts to repeal or dilute the protections that marriage equality law provides. If we look at the states where marriage has passed 10 years ago or short, or in the intermediate time, there have been numerous attempts as well. Many of them are not, and our opponents also realize that they will never be able to turn back the clock and repeal marriage equality altogether. But what they are going to try to do is surgically try to create new carve-outs, new exemptions, such as based on religious beliefs and and other similar pretexts. So we've got to be there to defend this, and not just marriage, but also anti-bullying legislation, also workplace, housing, public accommodation protections, and the like. Secondly, we have great laws that we already passed. We've got to make sure that we implement them. For example, what we do with our corporate partners and corporations large and small is make sure they go above and beyond the minimal requirements of the law that say you cannot discriminate, and actually affirmatively create welcoming and inclusive workplaces where anyone can advance and prosper. So we have a corporate responsibility project where we work with large employers and small employers to evaluate their existing policies and practices and help them change those. We also work with communities of faith. We have a network of 1,148 clergy members representing 278 houses of worship in around 70 population centers around the state that are committed to creating safe places for LGBT individuals. So if someone is feeling, if someone is experiencing bullying in school and cannot go or say that to her parents, because that may mean coming out, she will know that when she goes to church with her parents, that she can go and seek out that pastor who's identified as a welcoming and inclusive pastor and talk to him or her about the situation that this person is experiencing, and creating safe space so that this child knows that there is hope in the world. And then the third audience that we have, of course, is LGBT community itself, because if we have laws that protect us, but we don't know what our rights are, what our protections are, and we can't use those laws, then those laws aren't really doing their job. And so the third stream of work that we have is making sure that our community is engaged, educated, and empowered to demand what is ours, which is full equality under the law.
So I kind of wear a couple hats. One is, the newspaper itself has its role of covering the community, the good and the bad and the ugly that happens within the community, holding organizations and individuals accountable, sponsoring events, all those kinds of things that we do. We also play a role, I think, in documenting history. Victor Salvo and Christopher are here from the Legacy Project. A newspaper plays a role in that legacy, making sure that it's documented for future generations to know where they came from. So that's kind of that hat. But also, since I've been doing this 30 years, I have frequently stepped outside of that role a little bit, because it can get very frustrating covering an issue again and again and again and not seeing any movement on it. So with the March on Springfield last year, that would be one example of how I step out of a role of publisher. And then with this homeless youth work that we've been doing, it's very unusual. People are like, why is Windy City Times doing this work? It's because we've covered the issue of homeless youth in Chicago for 30 years. We did a huge series about a year and a half ago called Generation Halls, did an 8-part series, won a bunch of awards, and nothing happened in the community on the issue. And so what we need sometimes is to step outside of maybe our role as where we work, where we volunteer, where we give our money, and come together in a coalition way so that we can lift all boats better. And sometimes in our community we have such a competitive environment for funding. 95% of the LGBT community doesn't give to LGBT causes. So we have a very competitive environment. People don't want to share their donor lists, they don't want to share anything, because they're all struggling for survival. And my frustration is that once in a while we need to get outside of that bubble. And because if we do that, I think more people would give. They'd be less worried about this competition and getting in the battle, and realize that we actually can accomplish some good. So I think with this homeless youth work, there's an opportunity for people to actually feel like they can affect some change. So we're going to do private adoption of apartments. So for $750, people will be able to say they housed one youth for 1 month. You get 10 of your friends together at $75 a month for 2 years, you're going to house a youth for 2 years. And it's going to be directly going to funding apartments that then case managers at existing homeless youth agencies will fill. You can help laundry, you can help on storage, you can help on feeding and clothing and all these other ways where we move from talking about that issue, being frustrated about kids hanging out on the streets when they have nowhere else to go, and work on giving them skills and internships and opportunities to advance themselves. So once in a while at the paper we step outside of just being a newspaper to try to figure out a way to engage people on a larger project, whether that's a gay game sporting tournament, a March on Springfield, or in this case, homeless youth issues.
So I just want to point out that all of us up here, with the exception of Tracy, make our living as well. So my dog has dog food because I work for Chicago House. Tracy's youth advocacy and what she's talking about is completely above and beyond any sense of her duty. And so when she talks about giving money to help these kids, I hope we are all of us, including our panelists, are thinking about digging into their pockets.
And talking about that, obviously marriage is a cause that everyone sort of gets behind, because they're like, whether you're in a relationship or not, you think to yourself, well, I want to be able to get married. So it's a cause that has wide-ranging support among the LGBTQ community. Homelessness and poverty, a lot of gay men and lesbians and and other people in the community are not in dire circumstances financially. So they may not see that, they may not have such a personal or immediate connection to that cause. How do we continue to foster and encourage a sense of engagement among our community towards causes that may not directly affect them?
I want to answer that quickly because this is the room for this, right? You build empathy for corporate brands. We can build empathy for our LGBT nonprofits in a much better way if we had partnerships with groups like that are in this room. There's a way to do this. The other 95% of the LGBT community and our allies, which are phenomenally more of them, will give if properly reached through messaging. So I think there is definitely a role to play to up the game of all of our nonprofits in Chicago, but then also in some of the coalition work that we can do.
I agree. Lambda's had a pretty long history with both Starcom and Leo Burnett, and now it's so huge I don't even understand it. But Starcom has worked with us in figuring out how to talk about issues. Or no, it's the other way around. Starcom figured out how to target very specific people that we needed to reach out to. Like, so whether it was lawyers on the side of volunteering that would give their time, or people that we needed, that we were trying to unearth for cases. Like, youth are one of our hardest cases to find, especially homeless youth, because by the very nature of their being transient, the hearing's set 6 months down the road or whatever it is. And Leo Burnett, a guy named John Menifee, who some of you may know. I love John Menifee. But he, it's hard to be cool with lawyers. And we're like the nerds of the movement. And John had figured out, well, Bon Foster, who is our founder, was controversial, that none of his ideas were accepted when he did it, and so he started linking us back to other movements and developed a way that we talk about Lambda that went national and continues with us to this day. But I think what's interesting, and to your question more specifically, is I feel like marriage was a movement. I mean, when it started, and it's right when I moved to Chicago, about 95, 96, the first Freedom to Marry event that we did was to convince our own community that we wanted marriage. Many of us were not there. I certainly was not. And it took a while to sort of, and also our opposition realizing that they could punish us with marriage to unite the community on marriage. And it obviously has hit this point of like an avalanche. But a community is different. And so to me, like, we're going into this phase where we're more of a community, but we don't have this one singular issue like marriage that everyone could be like, oh, right, that's the gay issue. And so to me, the issues of full equality, liberty, dignity, fairness, justice, those are things that our whole community can get behind, and that our responsibility is to move people from this excitement of everyone being engaged with one singular focus to recognizing that our community, and I would include people with HIV, because that certainly is not all just LGBT any longer, or never was really, and it is to sort of broaden our scope of how we look at ourselves and then how we reach out to others.
I do want to say, some 18 centuries ago, there was a Jewish sage who challenged his disciples to ask themselves, if we are not for ourselves, who will be for us? And if we're only for ourselves, then who are we? Right? And it was a challenge and a call that I think applied not only to Jewish populations throughout the centuries, but to us as an LGBT community today. It's a recognition that many of us joined the LGBT equality movement because of a personal stake in it. There's something, in this for us, but also the challenge that applies to us now, in that we won all these rights that we won because somebody else stepped outside of their own sort of spectrum of needs and said, I believe in this as a human rights issue, I believe in this as a basic fairness issue, and fought alongside with us and for us, even though it was not for them personally. And we have this moral obligation now that even if these issues like poverty and homelessness don't impact us directly and very immediately, that we've got to give back and continue to stay engaged. And I think as a community, we have the capacity to do so, we have the obligation to do so. Obviously, I'm not an expert on messaging, but I think there is, I'm not giving up hope.
Jim, you talk about community, and I'm wondering if you think that, if all of you think that the LGBTQ community is more or less unified than it used to be. Sometimes it feels like we can be splintered in a way, everyone's sort of pursuing their own interests. But speak to how you think this community has changed and evolved and where we need to go.
I know Tracy's going to say something smarter than me, and so I wish you would say that. I know. I actually feel pretty good about our community in general, in that when marriage was really starting up, the issue that Lambda kept looking at was, what was our freedom rider moments? Like, when does the majority join us? And we were convinced that the youth would never join us, because who wants to get married? Like, and so when you're 24 or younger, it's not what you're thinking about. And so after Obama won, and we had that great party in Grant Park, and we struggled to get back to work the next day, it was a sucker punch to find out that California had passed Prop 8. And it was shocking to watch first the youth in California and then nationwide begin the protest against having rights taken away, and rights that they really hadn't joined yet. And I also think that there were tools. Certainly the Obama campaign gave our movement the tools of being able to raise funds in a small amount of dollars and organize through Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And I also believe that when I look at the marriage fight and where we're headed now, there's so many other things that have happened that I believe are related, although I have absolutely no proof. So, like, the NBA, the guy that was so cool, Jason Collins, and I know nothing about sports, although I understand that San Francisco won the baseball thing. But to have players be able to come out, to have the guy from Apple, although I just sort of assumed forever that he was gay. I was a big announcer, and to have the trans movement become such a huge issue, where you see Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine. Now, it in no way says that we're getting completely where we need to be. That at the crimes and the physical abuse against, especially black female trans, it's appalling. And I look at the It Gets Better campaign, which was so beautiful and so exciting. But I think until you're ready to be gay, you weren't watching those videos. And so at the same time that we're watching that campaign grow, we're watching the highest number of kids either kill themselves or bullying and things like that. So there's certainly challenges. But I do feel like our community has found each other, and we're connected more than we've ever been. And certainly for Lambda Legal, as we look at our work, we're in the middle of our strategic planning, or actually just wrapped it up a month ago. And we're looking far more for us about the groups on the ground, the small, especially groups of color, and people that are very close and on the ground in their community, that those are the logical partners for us as we pursue future litigation, because they're reaching the people that we need to reach the most. Now Tracy will give the correct answer.
I got the question because you're so funny. During the AIDS crisis, the community was made stronger by coming together. And prior to that, there were a handful of people in the Chicago gay community who would let themselves be photographed, and it's usually people who worked at bars or played on gay bar sports teams. It was just a really closed and closeted world. And pretty much everybody who was active knew each other, right? And so when I talk to students today and they're like, oh my gosh, ACT UP, it had to be so amazing, all these people come together. There were a few dozen at any one time, in any one meeting, that changed the world. And now we have hundreds of thousands of people across the country who are changing that world. So we are not a single point failure movement, right? They cannot take one of us out and take us all out. And that's a good thing. So we fight like, crabs in a cage, right? Pulling each other down all the time, just like every other movement. And so we basically, we've won because we're just like every other movement. We cannibalize our own, we hate each other most of the time, but when we need each other, we come together, and like family, we come together when we need each other, and we may have to fight through misogyny and gender identity issues and all those other things to work together, but we do come together when we have to. So I think I'm heartened by the phenomenal growth in 30 years of people who are out and willing to be photographed, willing to have their names on the wedding pages, whatever it might be. And marriage, to me, I'm not a proponent of marriage as a government institution. I've said it many times. The government needs to get the hell out of the marriage business and stop discriminating against single people. There's tax returns, right? My partner of 20 years is here. I am partnered, but it's a discrimination, right? So I don't even think the government should be in marriage at all. But I have seen the benefit of marriage pulling all of our other issues with it, right? So it forced people to be activists who really just wanted to get married. So it created a much larger movement, and therefore the benefit was immeasurable.
So do you have anything to add? For that generation coming up that hasn't had to fight as much as previous generations may have, in your experience, do you feel like that identity or that self-identity as being a part of the LGBTQ community is different? Is it evolving? Is it, do people, it seems like the people I know who are under 30, it may not be such a strong identifier for them. They're gay, but they're also this and this and this. And when I came out, I thought that, wow, this is the stamp that makes me different. And I think it's not necessarily like that today. Do you feel like gay identity is evolving?
I'm sorry. I definitely feel like assimilation could really hurt this movement in a way that it hasn't hurt other movements, because we can hide so easily. So I do worry about that aspect of it, but it's really terrific to see the acceptance of peers, straight allies. That was what we always wanted. That we knew that to win, we had to win with our allies because we didn't have enough votes ourselves. So it's a good thing, but it also can have a negative. They will come to the community when they need something, when they get beat up, when a friend loses a job. That's when we get the calls. That's when Lambda, everybody else gets the calls. And so we have to support those groups that are going to be there as the safety net. And assimilation, what does the Borg say? Assimilation is, you can't be, resistance is futile, but I worry that will be our demise if we don't realize we still do need each other for those times of need, and because of familial homophobia within families, that is the true damage that's happening. So the youth I meet are not all okay because of the psychological costs. They're still paying that price.
So earlier Tracy mentioned a very important statistic, and that is that 95% of us don't give to LGBTQ causes. My guess is if you're in this room, you're in that 5%. So there's no reason to preach to the choir, but I think a critical question, it's easy just to say, well, that 95%, they just suck, they don't care, they're self-absorbed. And I think it's much more responsible of us to say, what have we not been offering them that actually invites them in an attractive way? And I think that's especially true for our youth. So the whole concept of pride could easily go away if we don't have something that we're doing special that we should actually be proud of. And again, I think the idea of, to be a broken record, to really be taking care of one another in a way that other communities would envy would be that sense of pride that would make both those within our community and our allies want to keep joining with us.
Now, considering our setting and that our audience is sort of a business audience, where people who do not necessarily work in the nonprofit world, how do you convince sort of a white-collar crowd that being active in the kinds of organizations that you work with can be advantageous for them, beneficial to their career, a good thing in general, and not just something that's philanthropic?
So, I think it's care about poor people really isn't going to ever work, right? You know, the guilt in religion really doesn't work. It's when we find ourselves in each other that we actually can form that bond. And look at how white the room is, right? Like, we don't talk overtly about issues of race. We don't talk overtly. We're starting to more about issues of gender identity. And so I really feel like it's in showing, you know, what are those black kids doing on our street, right? You know, like, it's breaking it down and showing how that black kid is actually you know, and showing how when they came out to their parents, their stories just actually, it's pretty close to yours. And it's breaking down that crazy, who are they? What, you know, and it is race, and it is gender identity, and it is immigration, and it is safe schools, but overall, it's poverty, because we got the Trans Life Center built through people like Lana Wachowski and Jennifer Pritzker. But if you're Lana Wachowski and Jennifer Pritzker, it's not easy to be trans, but you're just fine. But if you're the wrong type of LGBTQ, which is poor, then you're not. Then you've got funny teeth at a black tie, and nobody wants to talk to you. So again, it's finding our commonality that I think is going to be the key of us staying proud.
JK?
Sure.
Specific to the poverty and homeless issue, are you watching what's going on in Utah in terms of supportive housing, instead of sort of making conditions for creating housing for homeless individuals, that it's there?
Right, so the question is about what Utah's doing about homeless issues in general, and there are some other projects like 100,000 Homes for the Homeless that are seeing homeless having a home as a right. And it also is cheaper for medical costs, for all sorts of costs to society. Giving people homes that need homes is the best answer. So I definitely see that Utah is one of the models out there, and there are definitely things that Chicago is trying to do, but it's so slow, and federal money is it's going away, even state money is as well, that we also need to look at some private solutions too. But absolutely, I think Utah is showing that that's a cost benefit. So there's ways you can sell it, because you're talking about how do you have to look to ways to sell this, and one of it is economics. It's actually cheaper to house people than to not house people. The costs on the system, especially the emergency rooms and other things, are cheaper. The other way to do that is through more working together, more mentorships, more getting people to know who these youth are. And just in the last year, since I've so intensely worked on this, just really this year, outside of being a journalist on it, all of the youth, we had 100 youth that showed up to a job fair last week, and 100 youth that showed up to the summit. These are youth that actually are engaged and want to have a relationship with adults in our community, but the adults are often afraid to do that for a variety of reasons. Race and class is one of those, but also the stereotypes that many of our generation grew up with about working with youth, especially gay men. So there are barriers from both sides that I think we can work on. And on the corporate level, I think that for brands that are working in the LGBT community, there is a lot more engagement, I feel, that can happen beyond the black tech galas. And so if you're the Container Store and we're working on storage issues, let's get engaged. If you're Whirlpool, let's get you to get some machines into these homeless youth shelters. There's almost for every brand out there, there's a way into issues in a much deeper level. And some of them do it really well. I'm just saying I think there are more brands, especially the more consumer-oriented brands, that could be doing a lot more.
To the, I guess your question of sort of for white collar and does it make as much sense, or what's the benefit? I do think we're different. I mean, I do feel like the queer community is is different. Like, and it's sort of that experience when you first came out, or like for me, I mean, I'm of a different generation, but when I came out, to go to Sidetrack, and I'm like, well, we all like musicals, or we all, or we all like Bewitched, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or whatever, and you find that there's sort of a sensibility, and then there's certain industries we're drawn to. So the fact that you were afraid at first to come out, and you thought it was odd because you're in advertising, we're the creative class. So it's it is sort of an interesting, if you value diversity, if you value difference, and businesses need to attract clients, you want someone that looks like the client you're going after. And so you want that diversity. And I've been at Lambda legal 8 years, and when I started, there were many of the lawyers. We used to send our little magazine, whatever it was called, in a plain envelope in case it was embarrassing for them to get. And when I had started, the young people coming on as associates, their best chance they thought of getting to be a partner in a major firm was being gay, or lesbian, or bisexual or transgender, because that gave them this edge that was a little bit different than others. And there's also industries that we're really in. So, like working on the minimum wage campaign, we have a ton of gays in like the hotel industry and in the service industry. For some reason, we're drawn to very specific sort of customer service type industries and places like that. And so there's sort of logical places where Lambda ends up being in, because that's also then where most of our discrimination cases take place. Or for example, for the trans community, there's a woman, Faye Clayton, who's here in Chicago, and she's a great reproductive rights lawyer, went to the Supreme Court, but she's also was did these landmark trans cases, and it turned out there's a lot of trans pilots that had taken these very risky jobs and they joined the Air Force and took these very difficult assignments because they wanted to be seen as men, and so they took these scary masculine jobs, and then when they later transitioned and were working for different airlines, I believe Continental was the first one, where she took that case thinking it was just this one case, and then all these pilots began contacting her because they wanted to transition, and now they saw this path. So I feel like anywhere we're at, to bring our full identity is important, and that was, I guess, sort of the shocking thing about the Apple guy. What is his name? Tim Cook. I love Apple. But Tim Cook, in his quote, he's like, well, there's a lot of things. I'm a sports fanatic, and I'm this and this. Well, you're not getting beaten up for being a sports. Well, you could. But there's that this is part of your identity. It carries still risk to it, and it's great to be in Illinois, but most of my time now is in Missouri, North Dakota, South Dakota, Indiana. It's not so easy.
I just want to throw in a commercial plug. So Chicago House does have an employment program for low-income people within the LGBTQ community. And we've got entry-level jobs, and we need also we've got entry-level people for jobs, and we need corporate partners. So we're not going to give you an MBA grad, but we will give you the person who needs the start at the reception desk. So please contact me or whoever, and let's start building those bridges a little more.
So something that Stan said earlier stuck with me, which is that sometimes maybe the reason why people aren't getting more involved, people from our own community, in the work of pursuing equal treatment for LGBTs is because we're making it too hard or too unappealing for people to join. Well, let me be explicit with you and tell you two ways in which you can give. You can give your money, you can give your bodies. Here's how you can do it. If you're moved by anything that we're saying today, then you can write a check, not just to any of our organizations or to the project that Tracy is working on, but to a plethora of LGBT organizations here at Chicagoland or beyond. If you don't want to write a check because that's too much of an involvement for you, then organize your employer jeans day, and if you can wear jeans, you get $5 into a pot, and then you decide jointly where the whole pot goes. I promise you that, if 50 of you participate and you raise even $250, then that's going to make a huge difference for a shelter or for many of the other projects that many of us are involved with. And your bodies is the other way you can be involved. Here are 2 ways you can give your bodies. One is you can, don't laugh, it's serious. One is you can volunteer. Many of our organizations rely on volunteers to do our work. So from September 2nd through November 4th until 9 p.m. at Equality, Illinois, we have up to 24 phone bankers calling Illinois voters and getting them out to vote. I don't know how many of you have known, you've been able to request your ballot and vote by mail online. You can early vote, you can vote on election day. If you're not registered, you can do grace period registration where you register at the polling place on the day that you vote and then vote right away. There are so many opportunities, and yet this year we still project only 38% of the 2012 voters to vote. So if you can't give up your money, give up your bodies, come and phone bank for half an hour, for an hour, for 5 hours at our office or anywhere else. And the other place is you're all accomplished professionals. You're sitting in this room because you work for these great companies. Call your high school and find if there's a GSA, and then invite some of those students to come and spend a day with you or an hour with you to get to know you and mentor them, and show them that all the opportunities that they can have, and it gives them hope, it gives them some skills, it gives them a mentor who is openly LGBT or an ally to look up to, and those make a huge difference as well. So these are big commitments, there are small commitments, but they can really make a difference, and I hope that all of you, or most of you, will do one of those things afterwards.
We do have time for a few questions, if anyone has a question for one of our panelists.
This is actually for many of the panelists. One of the things that this common theme is this idea of diluting or monetization of our movement over the next couple of years, because we're not going to have a lightning rod like marriage. We still do, but that will fade after a while because we get right from that. In your opinion, what is one very good way in which to pull the community together when the community doesn't feel overall that their rights are being corrected on a day-to-day basis?
So we do have national leaders who are working on this. I'm hopeful that we come to something good out of it, and of course the national movement overall involves the coast, so it involves people from DC, Boston, and New York, and LA, and San Francisco. So actually on most of these committees there's nobody from Middle America. But I do think that if we're really going to get there, it is going to take a national, so marriage equality. Nobody asked us to change all of our Facebook pictures to red marriage bands. It just happened because there was a national fervor. And somewhere somebody's got to kind of help us find what that fervor is going to be before the window closes. Because reassembling us after we've the window's closed, I think is going to be quite a task.
Canada definitely experienced this post-marriage. A lot of the organizations folded. They were not able to continue the momentum. It's a much, more sparse nation, but it's definitely a warning sign for what we're doing. So I think the nonprofits that do exist, it's obviously incumbent on them to keep the momentum going within their own issues in their areas. AIDS has experienced the issues of AIDS and burnout, and trying to keep the AIDS walk going and other things going. It is a matter of persistence, but also populating new people into it because of the burnout. People absolutely cycle through activism and cycle through giving. And I think our organizations all need to, I always say that a lot of our next generation of leaders are actually playing sports right now. We need to make sure that people who are playing sports right now, who can still play sports right now, are aware of our organizations and utilize their energy, time, and connections to foster them into the agencies as board members, things like that. A lot of the organizations do have junior boards, and we just need to keep that up. If you think about how many people are actually paid to do the work in Chicago, in the LGBT and AIDS communities, it's a very tiny little number. So that volunteer base needs to constantly be repopulated so that we can have the ability to call a march on Springfield together where we got 5,000 people, and I think about 40% of those were straight allies. So that the base organizations are staffed, so that when we need to really up the ante for a protest or whatever, for election, that there are people there that have it as their job to get those people out. So that's why we need the organizations to continue.
Yeah, I guess I feel like I feel like fear is a very good motivator, and so like any of us, we procrastinate, and I could just be speaking for myself, but I do think fear is one of the things that always pulls people together. And you look at this election, and no one's out there just talking positive things about themselves and hoping they can win. I feel like the things that are more close to who we are as people. So anytime it's focusing on relationships, I think youth is a connection, because we were all young at one point, and most, if not all of us, went through that struggle of being so alone until we came out. And at the Chicago House lunch a couple weeks back, I think it was at Lance Dustin Black, and he was talking about that he just personally took on going back home, because he was from Texas, I think, or Louisiana, or something like that, somewhere horrible. And he went back, and he felt this obligation. And I'm originally from Springfield, and when we were working on the marriage fight, I contacted my high school and I offered myself to come speak, and I was terrified. And I'm as gay as you come, and everyone knew. But to be in your own high school, still have a couple of my teachers still there, but I felt like this is something I sort of wanted to do, because it was so awful to be in high school closeted, and I wanted to sort of have this opportunity to reclaim it, and it felt so personally powerful to me. I mean, it was all, so again, it was self-interest. I mean, that's why I really went, but it was amazing. And I also think senior work, because that's where we're all hopefully headed. And the thought of having to go back in the closet, of being afraid of being in a nursing home or a retirement center where I can't bring my true identity to bear, it's unthinkable, but it happens all the time. And so I commend the Center on Halstead and Heartland Alliance, because I went to that, and it was so gorgeous to see all these seniors who were so proud of their housing. It was just I hope to live there someday. But so I mean, those are the things that I feel like are the logical places where I hope to turn to for money and turn to for volunteers. And then I do believe there's some really good foundations, national and local, that I look to at least more for some of our work that's a little bit harder to explain, or that we know that we have to do, but it's sort of in this cleanup phase of the work that's harder to get individual or personal support for.
Last questions.
I just had a question about whether there is some kind of central database to talk about volunteering. I find it very hard to find volunteer opportunities that, without searching 10 million times, or find something that fits your schedule. Also, I think almost everybody mentioned mentorship. I'm an ally, so I don't think we really want me on that ticket. But just finding the right fit for your schedule at work or something like that. Is there some kind of place that everything's housed in one area, so I know I'm giving to a cause that I believe in with my time, but I can also make it fit with my day-to-day?
I'm not personally aware. I mean, at Windy City Times, we every day post organizational announcements about calls for volunteers or races that are coming up. So I would say, get on our email list. It comes out every Thursday, and it has events that are happening, benefits, volunteer opportunities. But you're right, there isn't any one easy database. Even in the homeless youth area, there's no actually LGBT homeless youth organization, believe it or not. All the organizations serve LGBT youth, but if you wanted to say specifically do that, there's finally a new group called Project Fierce, which has a benefit coming up November 9th I would recommend going to. It's a very grassroots organization creating housing opportunities for LGBT youth specifically. But all of these organizations post their calendar announcements in Windy City Times and on Chicago Pride and other websites. So go to websites maybe that aggregate the announcements of organizations to look. And then once you get in one, you'll find out about opportunities at others. Like if you do the AIDS walk, you'll come across 27 other organizations that are participating in that AIDS walk and find other opportunities. So it is a little bit of a high barrier, but there definitely are resources to find.
Just go to Lambda.
On that, oh, go ahead.
Just, if any of you, so you can come and cook a meal at Chicago House, but if that's, and that's fulfilling, but like all of you, my guess is have a very specific skill set from what you do professionally that could actually be more valuable to us. And Taproot Foundation does a very good job of connecting. So if you're an IT guy, they will channel you into an IT need at a nonprofit in Chicago House where you're actually offering your expertise. We've used them quite a bit on stuff, and that's also a very rewarding experience.
So I can't be silent when there's a volunteer offer. Michael Nordman, stand up. So Michael is our Director of Development. If any of you want to volunteer for Equality Illinois or our partner agencies, will talk to Michael and we'll connect you to our peers as well. Or if you want to give money, Michael is also your guy.
So if you haven't gotten the sheet, there's some more up here, but there are very specific volunteer opportunities that are going to come up over the next couple months to build and paint and feed and clothe and hopefully adopt apartments. So what we want to do is create very small, short-term opportunities for those who are really busy, as well as engaging with existing agencies like Night Ministry, Teen Living, Unity Parenting for the long term on these projects. So you'll be able to pick and choose what fits your schedule.
On that note, I think we'll wrap. Karl, do you have any final comments?
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to talk loud. How's that? So first and foremost, thank you to our panelists for coming this evening. This is thank you so much for all the work that you do every day. It's invaluable to our community. For the audience, please stay. The bar will remain open, so network, have a drink. Please come and talk to our panelists and learn more about their organizations, find out how you can get involved, how you can donate your time and your money. There are also some materials available in the back if you want to peruse those back by the back windows. And if you haven't done so, please next Tuesday get out and vote and make your voice heard.
The Windy City Times election guide back there that lists the Quality Illinois ratings and all the other organizations. We don't endorse, but we list all the organizations, so they're in the back.
Somebody would do that, great. And lastly, I was born and raised in Naperville, so if any of you have questions or you're struggling, you can come and talk to me. Thank you all so much.
One more thing is I can't get this many gay men in a room without saying, if you're lucky enough to still be negative and you're sexually active with more than just your husband, talk to your doctor about PrEP. Talk to your doctor about PrEP.